The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare buzz overhead as Sarah Mitchell clutches her boarding pass. B12. Flight 447 to Denver. Her hands tremble, not from caffeine, but from something else. Something wrong. The announcement echoes. Now boarding. She steps forward, then stops. In a reflection of the gate window, she sees it. Twisted metal, screaming passengers, the earth rushing up to meet them. Her heart pounds. She backs away from the gate. The vision had lasted only seconds, but Sarah could still feel the phantom sensation of falling, the taste of copper in her mouth, the sound of metal groaning under impossible stress. She stood frozen in the boarding area, watching other passengers file past her with their carry-ons and tired expressions. "Ma'am, are you boarding?" The gate agent's voice seemed to come from underwater. Sarah blinked, focusing on the woman's concerned face. I need a moment." The October wind rattled the terminal windows. Outside, she could see Flight 447 sitting on the tarmac, its white body gleaming under the harsh airport lights. Such an ordinary sight. Yet, in her mind, she kept seeing it broken, scattered across some nameless field. She pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and dialed her assistant. "Cancel the Denver meeting. Tell them I'm sick. But Sarah, this is the Morrison case. You've been preparing for months. Cancel it." She hung up and walked to the customer service desk, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The smell of coffee and jet fuel mixed in the recycled air. "I need to change my ticket," she told the clerk, a young man with tired eyes. "There's a change fee, and the next flight isn't until—" "I don't care about the fee." As she waited for the new ticket, she watched Flight 447 taxi away from the gate. Her rational mind screamed that she was being ridiculous. Premonitions weren't real. She was a lawyer, for God's sake. She dealt in facts, evidence, logic. But as the plane disappeared into the gray Chicago sky, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. The clerk handed her a new boarding pass. Flight 892, departing at 11:30 p.m., Gate C-15. Sarah nodded, gathered her things, and walked toward the new gate. Behind her, she didn't see the news alert that would flash across the airport screen 6 hours later. Flight 447 experiences severe turbulence over Colorado. Emergency landing in progress. She had made the right choice, or so she thought. The terminal was quieter now, most of the day's travelers already at their destinations. Sarah found a seat near her new gate and opened her laptop, trying to distract herself with work. But the words on the screen blurred together. Every announcement over the intercom made her jump. Every passing maintenance worker reminded her of twisted metal and screaming engines. The coffee shop nearby was closing, its barista wiping down tables with methodical precision. The scent of disinfectant mixed with the lingering aroma of espresso. Sarah realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast, but the thought of food made her stomach turn. Rough day? She looked up to see a man in a pilot's uniform not for her airline, but still wearing the confident bearing of someone who spent his life in the sky. "You could say that," she replied. "First time flying nervous?" Sarah almost laughed. "I fly constantly, or I used to." "Now I'm not so sure." The pilot nodded understandingly. "Sometimes our instincts know things our minds haven't figured out yet. Trust your gut." As he walked away, Sarah felt a strange comfort in his words. Maybe she wasn't losing her mind. Maybe she had simply listened to a warning that her subconscious had picked up on. But as she settled back into her chair to wait for the late flight, she couldn't shake the feeling that avoiding one death had only delayed another. The reflection in the dark window showed her pale face, and beyond it, the lights of aircraft moving through the night sky like distant, dangerous stars. The hotel room in Denver was supposed to be temporary, just one night while she rearranged her schedule. But Sarah found herself extending her stay, day after day, unable to face the thought of returning to an airport. She told herself she was being practical, handling business remotely, but the truth was simpler. She was scared. The Marriott downtown sat on 17th Street, its glass facade reflecting the Rocky Mountains in the distance. Sarah's room on the 14th floor gave her a view of the city spreading out below like a circuit board of lights. She'd chosen the room specifically high enough to feel removed from the chaos of street level, but not so high that she felt trapped. On her third morning, she decided to venture out. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of snow. Denver's downtown bustled with the energy of a city that knew winter was coming, but wasn't quite ready to surrender to it. She walked to a small cafe she'd spotted from her window Murphy's, with its hand-painted sign and mismatched outdoor furniture. The kind of place that served coffee in actual mugs instead of paper cups. As she waited in line, she noticed the other customers. A businessman checking his phone obsessively, a young mother bouncing a fussy baby, an elderly man reading a physical newspaper like it was still 1995. Normal people living normal lives. None of them haunted by visions of twisted metal and falling sky. "What can I get you?" The barista was a college-age girl with purple hair and gauges in her ears. "Just black coffee. Large. Rough night?" Sarah looked at her reflection in the espresso machine's polished surface. Dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed washing, clothes she'd slept in. Something like that. She found a table by the window and opened her laptop. Email after email from Chicago clients wanting updates. Partners questioning her sudden absence, her assistant growing increasingly frantic. She'd have to go back soon. Real life didn't pause for inexplicable premonitions. But every time she pulled up airline websites, her hands would start shaking. The cursor would hover over the Book Now button, and she'd close the browser instead. A shadow fell across her table. She looked up to see a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Excuse me, but you look like someone who could use a friend." Sarah blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry?" "I'm Dr. Patricia Wells. I run a support group here in Denver, people dealing with anxiety, trauma, that sort of thing." "I couldn't help but notice you seemed troubled." "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically. Dr. Wells smiled. "In my experience, people who are fine don't spend 3 days in the same coffee shop, staring at flight booking websites without booking anything." Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks. Had she been that obvious? "What happened to you?" Dr. Wells asked gently. Sarah found herself talking. About the premonition, about Flight 447, about her inability to get back on a plane. Dr. Wells listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Therapist." "Have you looked into what happened to Flight 447? She asked when Sarah finished. "I was afraid to." Dr. Wells pulled out her phone and did a quick search. Her expression shifted. "Sarah, Flight 447 had severe turbulence over the Colorado Rockies. They had to make an emergency landing. Several passengers were hospitalized." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "Anyone, ... did anyone ... No deaths," Dr. Wells said quickly, "but it was close. Very close." The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah could hear every conversation, every clink of silverware, every hiss of the espresso machine. The normal sounds of life felt overwhelming, like she was hearing them through water. "I think," she said slowly, "I need to get some air." She stumbled outside, Dr. Wells following close behind. The October wind cut through her thin sweater, but she welcomed the cold. It felt real, present, unlike the surreal fog she'd been living in since the airport. "What does it mean?" she asked. "If I really saw something that was going to happen?" Dr. Wells was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes our minds pick up on patterns we can't consciously process. Maybe you noticed something about that flight, something that triggered your instinct for danger." "Or maybe," Sarah said, watching a plane draw a white line across the blue sky. Maybe some things are just meant to happen, and trying to avoid them only makes things worse. Dr. Wells followed her gaze upward. What do you mean? But Sarah was already walking away, back toward the hotel. She'd made up her mind. Tomorrow, she would book a flight home. She couldn't hide in Denver forever, and the longer she waited, the more power this fear would have over her. What she didn't know was that making that decision had set other wheels in motion. In Chicago, a maintenance worker at O'Hare was skipping a crucial inspection, running late for his daughter's school play. In air traffic control, a new hire was about to make his first serious mistake. And high above the Colorado Rockies, weather patterns were shifting in ways that would make tomorrow's flights particularly dangerous. Sarah's premonition had been about Flight 447, but destiny, it seemed, had other plans for Flight 892. That evening, Sarah sat on her hotel bed with her laptop open, the cursor blinking in the departure date field. October 15th tomorrow. She'd been in Denver for 5 days, and Chicago felt like another planet. Her absence had gone from concerning to career-threatening. The Morrison case had been reassigned to a junior partner. 3 other clients had specifically requested new representation. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, her law partner and closest thing to a friend she had. Sarah, what the hell is going on? You disappear, missed the biggest case of the year, and now I'm hearing you're having some kind of breakdown? She stared out the window at the Denver skyline. The lights of the city twinkled below like earthbound stars. I'm coming home tomorrow. Good, because the managing partners are asking questions I don't know how to answer. You've worked here for 12 years without taking a sick day, and now you vanish for a week? I had a reaction to something. I'm better now. There was a pause. Sarah, you know you can talk to me, right? Whatever's going on, I'll see you Monday, Marcus. She hung up and immediately called the airline. The automated system cheerfully offered her dozens of options: morning flights, afternoon flights, evening flights. All of them bound for Chicago O'Hare. All of them requiring her to do the one thing that terrified her most: trust her life to a machine hurtling through the sky at 500 miles per hour. Thank you for calling United Airlines. How can I help you today? The voice was warm, professional, utterly normal. Sarah almost hung up. I need to book a flight to Chicago tomorrow. Certainly. I have several options available. What time would you prefer to travel? Sarah closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she could still see flashes of her premonition, the violent shaking, the screaming passengers, the ground rushing up to meet them. The earliest flight available, that would be Flight 892, departing at 7:15 a.m., arriving at O'Hare at 10:45 am Central Time. Would you like me to book that for you? Flight 892, the same flight number from her original rebooking, the one she'd never taken. Coincidence, she told herself. Airlines reused flight numbers constantly. Yes, she heard herself say. After providing her information and credit card details, she hung up and stared at the confirmation email. Seat 14 window seat. She'd specifically requested it. If she was going to face her fear, she wasn't going to hide from it. The next morning came too soon. Sarah woke before her alarm, her body rigid with tension. The shower water felt too hot, then too cold. The hotel coffee tasted like ash. Everything felt hyper-real, as if someone had turned up the contrast on the world. The Uber to the airport was quiet except for the radio playing soft jazz and the driver occasionally humming along. Denver International Airport loomed ahead, its distinctive tent-like peaks reaching toward a sky that was already showing the gray promise of weather. Rough day to fly, the driver commented, glancing at the clouds. They're saying storms moving in from the west. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Just typical autumn weather, right? Maybe. But I've been driving to this airport for 15 years, and I've learned to read the sky. Something's brewing up there. The departure terminal was busier than she'd expected for an early morning flight. Business travelers with expensive luggage and tired eyes, families with crying children and too many bags, elderly couples moving slowly but determinedly toward their gates. Sarah checked in at a kiosk, her boarding pass printing with a mechanical whir. Gate B47. The same concourse where she'd first had her premonition, though at the opposite end. She walked there slowly, her carry-on rolling behind her with a steady clicking rhythm against the polished floor. The gate area was half full. A businessman in a wrinkled suit slept upright in an uncomfortable-looking chair. A young woman video-called what looked like her family, speaking rapid Spanish and laughing at something off-camera. A flight attendant, not one Sarah recognized, stood near the boarding desk, checking something on a tablet. Sarah found a seat with a view of the tarmac and pulled out her phone. No messages from work, yet it was still early in Chicago. But there was a text from Dr. Wells, the therapist she'd met at the coffee shop. Safe travels today. Remember, fear is just your mind trying to protect you. Trust yourself. Trust yourself. But which self? The rational attorney who knew that flying was statistically safer than driving? Or the woman who had seen twisted metal and falling sky in a moment of inexplicable clarity? Now boarding Flight 892 to Chicago O'Hare. Rows 30 to 20. Sarah's row wouldn't be called for several minutes, but she found herself standing anyway, joining the loose crowd of passengers gathering near the boarding desk. The gate agent was a middle-aged woman with a professional smile and tired eyes, the look of someone who had processed thousands of travelers and knew that most of them were just trying to get home, traveling for business or pleasure. Asked the man next to her in line. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair and a kind face. "Business," Sarah replied. "You?" "Going home. My grandson's birthday is tomorrow. 7 years old." He showed her a photo on his phone, a boy with gap-toothed grin holding a baseball. "First time I'm flying since my wife passed." She always handled the travel arrangements. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sure she'd want you to be there for him. That's what I keep telling myself." Now, boarding rows 20 to 10. Her row. Sarah handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, who scanned it with a beep and a smile. "Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Mitchell." The jet bridge stretched ahead of her like a throat waiting to swallow her whole. Behind her, she could hear other passengers shuffling forward, the quiet murmur of people preparing for the routine miracle of flight. Ahead of her lay Chicago, her life, her career, and whatever fate awaited Flight 892. As she stepped onto the plane, Sarah didn't know that in the cargo hold below, a maintenance issue that should have been caught during the previous night as inspection was about to make itself known at 35,000 feet. She didn't know that the weather system the Uber driver had noticed was intensifying faster than meteorologists had predicted. And she didn't know that the air traffic controller who would guide them through the most dangerous part of their flight was working his first solo shift after a sleepless night with a sick child. All she knew was that she was finally going home. Seat 14 was exactly where Sarah had expected, window seat on the right side of the aircraft, with a view that would show her the Rocky Mountains falling away as they climbed toward cruising altitude. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into the narrow seat, her hands gripping the armrests as other passengers filed past. The plane was a Boeing 737-800, modern and well-maintained from what she could see. The flight attendant, a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, demonstrated the safety procedures with practiced efficiency. Sarah found herself actually listening this time, memorizing the location of exits, the proper position for impact. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'm Captain David Chun, and I'll be flying you to Chicago this morning, along with First Officer Janet Rodriguez. We're looking at some weather between here and our destination, but nothing we can't handle. Flight time today will be approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes. We should have you on the ground right on schedule. David Chun. Sarah recognized the name from somewhere, though she couldn't place it. The voice was calm, confident, the kind of voice you wanted to hear when you were 6 miles above the earth. The engine spooled up with a low whine that vibrated through the cabin. Sarah pressed her face to the window as they taxied toward the runway, watching ground crews in fluorescent vests going about their morning routines. Everything looked normal. Professional, safe. First time flying? Asked her seatmate, an elderly woman with silver hair and a crossword puzzle. No, Sarah replied. It's been a while. I understand. After 9/11s, I didn't fly for 5 years. But you can't let fear run your life, can you? The plane turned onto the runway, and Sarah felt the familiar sensation of being pressed back into her seat as the engines reached full power. Through the window, she watched the ground blur past, faster and faster until that miraculous moment when the earth fell away and they were airborne. Denver spread out below them like a map come to life. The downtown skyline, the suburban sprawl, the brown ribbon of the South Platte River winding through it all. Then they were climbing through a layer of gray clouds, and the city disappeared. Folks, we're going to go ahead and turn on the seatbelt sign. Captain Chun's voice came over the intercom. We're encountering some light chop as we climb through these clouds. Should smooth out once we reach our cruising altitude. Light chop. Sarah had heard that phrase dozens of times on previous flights. It was airline speak for mild turbulence, nothing to worry about. But as the plane began to bounce gently in the air currents, she found her knuckles white where they gripped the armrest. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Maria, stopped beside her row. How are we doing over here? Fine, Sarah lied. Maria's eyes were kind but observant. She'd clearly seen nervous flyers before. I know it's bumpy right now, but this is completely normal. We should be above the weather shortly. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Through the window, she could see nothing but gray clouds rolling past like smoke. No reference points, no sense of up or down except for the pressure in her ears as they continued to climb. Her phone buzzed with a text message, Marcus again, probably wanting to know her arrival time. But when she looked at the screen, the message was from a number she didn't recognize. The sky remembers everything. She stared at the words, a chill running down her spine. A wrong number, obviously. Someone meant to send that cryptic message to someone else. She deleted it and put her phone in airplane mode. 20 minutes into the flight, they broke through the cloud layer into brilliant sunshine. The contrast was startling. Below them, a sea of white cotton stretched to the horizon, while above, the sky was the deep blue of high altitude. Sarah felt some of her tension ease. This was the part of flying she had always loved, the sense of being suspended between Earth and space, traveling at impossible speeds through thin air. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, Captain Chun announced. I'm going to turn off the seatbelt sign, but please keep your belts fastened while seated. We're showing some weather ahead, so it might get a little bumpy again as we approach the Chicago area. Sarah's seatmate had finished her crossword and was now reading a romance novel with a shirtless man on the cover. The businessman across the aisle was typing furiously on his laptop, occasionally glancing out the window with the bored expression of someone who flew too often to find any wonder in it. Everything was routine, normal, the kind of flight Sarah had taken hundreds of times before. But as they flew east toward Chicago, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them ahead, not just weather, something else. The message on her phone kept echoing in her mind. The sky remembers everything. What did the sky remember about Flight 447? What did it know about Flight 892? She pressed her face to the window again, looking down at the cloud layer below. Somewhere beneath that white expanse was the Colorado landscape she'd left behind, the coffee shop where she'd met Dr. Wells, the hotel room where she'd finally decided to face her fear. And somewhere ahead, Chicago waited her life, her career, her carefully ordered world that had been thrown into chaos by a 30-second vision that might have saved her life or simply delayed the inevitable. The plane shuddered slightly, a movement so brief she might have imagined it. But Maria, the flight attendant, paused in her service of beverages to steady herself against a seat back. Their eyes met, and Sarah saw something flicker in the young woman's expression. Not fear, exactly, but heightened awareness. "Just a little air pocket," Maria said with a smile that seemed slightly forced. "Nothing to worry about." But as she moved on to the next row, Sarah noticed she was moving more carefully now, her hand never far from something she could grab if needed. And when Sarah looked out the window again, the clouds below seemed darker, more turbulent, as if something violent was brewing in the white depths beneath them. The sky remembers everything. And sometimes, Sarah was beginning to realize, it remembered things that hadn't happened yet. The first real jolt came without warning. One moment Sarah was sipping her coffee, watching the peaceful landscape of eastern Colorado drift by below. And the next, she was pressed against her window as the plane dropped what felt like 100 feet in a single second. Her coffee splashed across her tray table, hot liquid soaking into her jeans. "Sorry about that, folks," came Captain Chun's voice, steady but more clipped than before. "We're encountering some significant weather ahead. I'm going to ask all flight attendants to take their seats, and passengers to make sure your seatbelts are tightened." The elderly woman beside Sarah grabbed her armrest, her knuckles white. "Oh my," she whispered. Maria appeared beside their row, moving quickly but calmly, checking seatbelts and securing loose items. When she reached Sarah, their eyes met again, and this time there was no attempt to hide the concern. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked quietly. Maria glanced toward the cockpit, then back. "I've been flying for 6 years. This is ... significant." Another violent shake ran through the aircraft, followed by a sickening drop that left Sarah's stomach somewhere near her throat. The plane rolled to the left, then corrected, then rolled again. Through the window, she could see they were now flying through the storm clouds rather than above them, gray-black masses of vapor that seemed alive with malevolent energy. Lightning flickered in the distance, too close for comfort. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Chun. We're experiencing some severe turbulence as we navigate around a weather system that's developed faster than predicted. I've requested clearance to climb to 41,000 feet to try to get above this. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to breathe steadily. This was normal, she told herself. Planes were designed for this. Turbulence was uncomfortable, but not dangerous. But even as she repeated these rational thoughts, her body was responding to something deeper, a primitive recognition of danger that no amount of logic could override. The plane lurched again, harder this time. Someone behind her cried out. A baby started crying. The businessman across the aisle had stopped typing and was gripping his laptop with both hands, his face pale. "This is Flight 892, she heard Captain Chun's voice, but not over the intercom. It was coming from the partially open cockpit door. Air traffic control's response was crackling and difficult to understand, but Sarah caught the words "unable" and "traffic." Another massive jolt threw her against her seatbelt, so hard it knocked the breath from her lungs. The plane was shaking now like a car with a flat tire at highway speed, a continuous vibration that made her teeth chatter. The overhead compartments were rattling. Someone's carry-on had come loose and was sliding down the aisle. Maria was moving through the cabin now, checking on passengers, but she had to grab seat backs and armrests to keep her balance. When she reached Sarah's row, the plane hit another air pocket, and she nearly fell into the aisle. "Are we going to be okay?" the elderly woman asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Maria's professional smile wavered. "The captain is doing everything he can to get us out of this." But Sarah was looking past her, toward the cockpit, where she could see Captain Chun and his first officer working frantically at their controls. The cockpit door was open now, standard procedure during severe weather, so the flight attendants could communicate with the pilots and she could hear fragments of their conversation. ... altitude deviation ... structural stress ... Now, the plane dropped again, a sickening elevator fall sensation that seemed to go on forever. When it finally leveled out, Sarah realized she could taste copper in her mouth, just like in her premonition. The same metallic tang of fear and adrenaline. Through the window, the storm clouds were darker now, almost black, shot through with veins of lightning that illuminated them from within like some kind of hellish Christmas decoration. The plane was being tossed around like a leaf in a hurricane, and Sarah realized with growing horror that they weren't flying through the storm, they were trapped in it. Her phone, still in airplane mode, somehow showed a message notification. Impossible, she thought, but she looked anyway. The same unknown number. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. "This is not happening," she whispered. "What?" her seatmate asked. But before Sarah could answer, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the cabin in an eerie red glow. The plane was still shaking violently, but now there was a new sound, a groaning, metallic stress noise that seemed to come from the very bones of the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Chun's voice came over the intercom, and for the first time, Sarah could hear the string in it. "We're experiencing some electrical issues along with the severe weather. We're going to begin our descent toward Denver International Airport as soon as air traffic control can clear us a path. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the flight crew. Denver." They were turning back. Sarah pressed her face to the window and saw something that made her blood run cold. In the lightning flashes, she could see other aircraft in the distance, at least 2, maybe 3, all fighting the same battle against the storm. One of them seemed to be descending rapidly, its lights flickering erratically. "Oh God," she breathed, and that's when she realized the truth. Her premonition hadn't been about Flight 447 at all. It had been about this moment, this flight, this storm. She had seen the future, but she had misinterpreted it. She had avoided one flight only to end up on another, the one that was always meant to be her last. The plane shuddered again, and this time the groaning metal sound was accompanied by a sharp crack that seemed to come from somewhere above her head. Through the red emergency lighting, she could see that one of the overhead compartments had partially opened, its contents threatening to spill out. "This is Captain Chen," came the voice from the cockpit, barely audible over the storm. "Flight attendants, prepare for emergency landing procedures. We're going down." Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously as Flight 892 fought its descent through the storm. Sarah could see Maria and the other flight attendants moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their calm voices instructing passengers in emergency positions, even as the aircraft bucked and rolled like a wild animal. "Head down, hands over your head," Maria called out, demonstrating the brace position. "Stay in this position until we come to a complete stop." Through her window, Sarah caught glimpses of the ground approaching through breaks in the clouds, patches of brown, Colorado earth that seemed to be rising toward them faster than any normal landing would allow. The plane was descending too quickly, the engines screaming as Captain Chun fought to maintain control. Her elderly seatmate was praying quietly in what sounded like Spanish, her rosary beads clicking softly between her fingers. The businessman across the aisle had his head down, following instructions, but Sarah could see his shoulders shaking. "This is Flight 892, declaring emergency." She heard Captain Chun's voice from the cockpit, no longer calm, no longer reassuring. "We have multiple system failures and severe structural stress. We need all emergency equipment standing by." The plane lurched violently to the left, and Sarah heard something that would haunt her final moments, the sound of metal tearing. Not the groaning stress she'd heard before, but the actual ripping of aircraft structure. Looking up, she could see that the overhead compartment directly above her had opened completely. And through the gap, she glimpsed something that shouldn't be there. Gray sky. A section of the fuselage was coming apart. "Everyone down. Emergency position now." Maria's voice cut through the chaos. No longer professional calm, but urgent command. Sarah bent forward, her head between her knees, her hands clasped over her neck. But as she did, she saw her reflection in the dark screen of her phone, her face pale and frightened, and beyond it, visible through the small window, the ground rushing up to meet them at an impossible angle. This was it. This was what she had seen in her premonition. Not the specific flight, not the exact circumstances, but this moment, the moment when gravity reclaimed them, when the miracle of flight ended, when the sky finally collected what it was owed. The plane hit the first time with a sound like the world breaking apart. Sarah felt herself thrown against her seatbelt, then sideways as the aircraft bounced and skidded across what she dimly realized was a farmer's field. The emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging them into a strange gray twilight filtered through smoke and broken windows. Then came the second impact, harder than the first, and the world exploded into chaos. The sound of twisting metal was deafening, punctuated by human voices, some crying out, some praying, some simply breathing hard in the sudden quiet that followed. Sarah opened her eyes and found herself looking at the sky through a jagged hole where the roof of the plane used to be. Storm clouds still rolled overhead, but they seemed farther away now, less threatening. The rain that had been drumming against the windows was now falling directly on her face, cool and clean. She tried to move and realized with distant surprise that she couldn't feel her legs. There was no pain, just a spreading numbness that seemed to be creeping up her body like rising water. Around her, she could hear other passengers stirring, calling out names, checking on each other. Sarah? It was her seatmate, the elderly woman with the crossword puzzle. "Are you all right, dear?" Sarah tried to answer, but found she couldn't quite catch her breath. The woman's face was cut and bruised, but her eyes were alert, concerned. "I'm going to get help," she said, struggling to unbuckle her seatbelt. "Don't," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure why. Something told her that help wouldn't matter now. This was how it was supposed to end. This was what she had seen. Through the hole in the fuselage, she could see emergency vehicles approaching across the field, their lights flashing red and blue against the gray afternoon sky. Paramedics, firefighters, people trained to save lives. They would pull survivors from the wreckage, treat the injured, comfort the dying. But Sarah found herself thinking not of rescue, but of the message she'd received on her phone. The sky remembers everything. It did remember every flight that had ever taken off, every landing that had gone wrong, every soul that had been claimed by the thin air miles above the earth. She had thought she could cheat death by avoiding Flight 447, but death had simply waited for her on Flight 892. Destiny, it seemed, was not about specific flights or exact times. It was about the inevitable intersection of choice and consequence, of fear and fate. As the numbness reached her chest, Sarah looked up at the storm clouds one last time. They were breaking apart now, letting through shafts of sunlight that turned the rain into brief, brilliant rainbows. Beautiful, she thought. Even in this moment, even in this broken aircraft in a Colorado field, the sky was beautiful.